The story opens at a military working dog training facility, a sprawling, well-ordered compound on the edge of a mid-sized southern city, the kind of place that smells of cut grass and clean kennels, and the particular focused energy of animals that have been trained to an extraordinary level of attentiveness. It is early morning, still cool, the light coming in long and flat across the training fields where obstacles and stations are laid out in careful configurations. The facility is run with the precision you would expect of any serious military operation, and on most mornings it functions with that precision, handlers and dogs moving through training rotations, evaluations proceeding on schedule, the controlled and purposeful world of military canine operations unfolding the way it is designed to unfold. But for the past 4 months, 7 dogs in a specific wing of the kennel block have not participated in any training rotation. They are fed, exercised, medically maintained. They are, by every clinical measure, healthy. They simply will not work. They will not accept commands from the rotating roster of qualified handlers who have been assigned to them, one by one, in a series of attempts that have grown progressively more baffling to the facility's leadership. The dogs are not aggressive. They are not broken. They sit, stand, move when asked to move for basic care. They simply look at each new handler with an expression that experienced dog people describe uncomfortably as waiting, as if each new person who enters the kennel is being assessed and found to be not the one they are looking for. The facility commander, Lieutenant Colonel Margaret Osey, has been a military officer for 23 years and has managed crises of logistics, personnel, and operational complexity without losing her equilibrium. The situation with the 7 dogs is the first thing in recent memory that has made her feel genuinely at a loss. She has read every relevant behavioral study, consulted with 3 different animal behavior specialists, and reviewed the deployment records of the dogs individually and collectively. None of it has produced a working explanation. The audience is given all of this in the opening pages, not through official language but through the texture of the place, the morning routines, the sounds of the kennel, the sight of a senior handler named Ray walking slowly past the 7 kennels for the 4th time this week with the look of a man reviewing a problem he cannot solve. The 7 dogs are introduced individually, not clinically but with the care of a narrator who understands that the audience will need to know these animals as personalities before the story can ask them to care about what happens to them. There is Atlas, a black German shepherd with the bearing of someone who has decided to be patient until patience is no longer required. There is Cora, a Belgian Malinois female whose intelligence manifests as a constant, evaluating alertness. She watches everything and gives nothing away. There is Bruno, large and deliberate, the kind of dog who communicates certainty. Juno, smaller and faster than the others, with an energy that has been contained rather than calmed. Wick, the oldest of the group, grey at the muzzle, whose refusal is not defiance but something closer to dignity. Pepper, who was the most recently certified of the 7, and whose behavioral shutdown began within days of the others, as if she picked it up from the group. And finally, Ghost, a pale shepherd whose colouring gives him an air of unreality and whose name turns out to have been well chosen, because he can be in a room for 20 minutes before you fully register his presence. All 7 were trained and certified under the same primary trainer. All 7 began their refusals within 2 weeks of his death. The connection is not a mystery. Everyone at the facility understands why the dogs are behaving this way in the broad sense. The mystery is what to do about it. The chapter ends with Ray leaning on the kennel fence in the morning light, watching Atlas watch him back and saying quietly to the dog, "I know, I'm not him either." The audience ends the chapter with a clear picture of the problem, a genuine feeling for the animals at its center, and the first pressing question: who was their trainer, and what kind of person leaves a mark this deep? His name was Sergeant First Class Joseph Callaway, Joe, to the people who worked alongside him, which was anyone who worked with him for longer than a week, because Joe Callaway was constitutionally incapable of sustaining formality with people he respected. He was 44 years old when he died of a sudden cardiac event on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning in the facility parking lot 8 months ago. He was survived by his sister, his 2 adult children, from a marriage that ended without bitterness, and the 7 dogs he had trained and certified over the previous 3 years. He had been working with military dogs for 16 years. He was not the loudest voice in any room he occupied, but he was reliably the most listened to, because Joe's assessments of animals and of people had a quality of accuracy that his colleagues described as almost unsettling. He did not perform confidence. He simply was confident in the quiet way of someone who has done hard things long enough to know what they are capable of. His relationship with the 7 dogs was not simply professional competency. Ray, who knew him better than most, describes it as a mutual choosing. A word that sounds sentimental until you spend time around animals trained to Joe's standard, and understand that they are not passive recipients of training, but active participants in the relationship it creates. Joe chose each of these dogs from evaluation pools for reasons he could articulate technically, but that Ray always suspected went beyond the technical. And the dogs over time chose him back in the way animals choose, which is not with ceremony, but with the complete and unswerving allocation of their attention and trust. The narration moves through Joe's life at the facility, in the way you move through a house after someone has left it, noting the particular things that mark a person's presence. His office was organized by a logic only he fully understood, but which everyone around him navigated without difficulty, because his organizational logic was an extension of the way he thought. He kept a photograph on his desk of a dog he'd trained and lost years ago, not his first, but the one he said taught him the most. He was the person at the facility that younger handlers came to when they were struggling, not because he had been designated a mentor, but because his door was reliably open and his advice reliably landed. He brought food to the kennel staff on Fridays without announcement or pattern, simply whenever he felt like it, which turned out to be often enough that people started looking forward to it without knowing why. He had one consistent personal quality that the narration establishes carefully because it will matter later. Joe never spoke about himself in relation to the dogs. He spoke about the dogs in relation to themselves. He said once to a new handler who asked how he built the kind of trust he had with his animals, "You don't build it, you earn it." And the difference is that building is something you do to something, and earning is something that happens between 2 things that are both paying attention. The chapter ends with Ray reading a brief from Lieutenant Colonel Osei about a new approach to the situation with the 7 dogs, an approach involving someone outside the facility, someone whose connection to Joe Callaway is indirect, unexpected, and not yet explained. The audience does not yet know who this person is. They only know that someone has been identified, and they need to know more. Her name is Nadia. She is 26 years old, a veterinary technician at a private animal hospital in a mid-sized city about 2 hours from the facility. She is the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, her father a civil engineer, her mother a high school biology teacher, and she grew up in the kind of household where education was understood as a form of love and competence, was understood as a form of respect. She chose veterinary medicine not because it was practical, which it was, but because animals had been her primary language since childhood, the thing she reached for when human language felt insufficient. She is good at her job with the particular quality of goodness that comes from genuine interest rather than performance. She notices things, small behavioral signals that other technicians miss, not because she is trying to notice them, but because she cannot help it. She lives alone in a 3rd-floor apartment with a cat named Ptolemy and a collection of houseplants of varying health statuses. She is not lonely in the way that word is usually meant. She is simply someone whose interior life is richer than her exterior circumstances currently reflect, and who has been patient about this without being passive about it. She has been waiting, without fully knowing she is waiting, for something to arrive that will use her properly. The connection between Nadia and Joe Callaway is not what the audience might expect. He was not her father, her mentor, her employer. He was, for 3 years, her uncle by marriage, the brother of her aunt's 2nd husband, a man who came to family gatherings with a particular quality of ease, and who, at a Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago, spent 2 hours in the backyard with Nadia, talking about animals in a way that she describes, to the one friend she has told about this, as the best conversation she has ever had with an adult about anything. They stayed in loose but genuine contact after that, texts every few months, a phone call on her birthday one year because he remembered, a link to an article about animal behavior he thought she'd find interesting. When he died, she was notified by her aunt, attended the service, sat in the back, and cried in a way she felt slightly embarrassed by, given that she had only known him a handful of years. She wrote a letter to his adult daughter after the service, a real paper letter, because Joe had told her once that real letters meant something that messages didn't, and in the letter she tried to describe what that Thanksgiving conversation had meant to her. She never sent it. She told herself she would when she found the right envelope, the right stamp, the right moment, and she has not found any of these things in 8 months. The unsent letter is in the drawer of her bedside table. The chapter ends with her phone ringing on a Wednesday evening, a number she doesn't recognize, and a voice identifying itself as belonging to Lieutenant Colonel Margaret Osei of a military working dog training facility. The audience sits with Nadia as she sits with her phone in her hand, and the question of what she is about to be asked is almost unbearable to hold. The call lasts 34 minutes. Osei is direct without being cold, a quality Nadia registers immediately and finds reassuring. She explains the situation with the 7 dogs, their refusal, the failed handler assignments, the growing operational concern, the behavioral consultants who have assessed and departed without solutions. She explains Joe's relationship to the dogs and the timing of their shutdown. She explains, carefully, that she is not calling Nadia because she has a scientific certainty that this will work, but because she has exhausted the options that offer scientific certainty, and she has a facility full of extraordinary animals who are suspended in a grief that no protocol was designed to address. How Osei came to Nadia specifically is its own small story. She found Joe's personal files while processing his effects. As his commanding officer, this fell to her. In his files was a folder labeled simply People Worth Knowing. It contained exactly 11 names. Most were colleagues, former students, handlers he'd worked with over the years. One was Nadia's. Beside her name, in Joe's handwriting, were 4 words: understands animals, really understands. Osei had run this down methodically, the way she ran everything down. She found Nadia's professional history, her academic record, her specialty within veterinary technology. And she read, in a behavioral assessment Joe had written for a facility review 2 years earlier, a passage in which he described the qualities he looked for in people who would be effective with military working dogs. Not handler qualities, but human qualities, the character traits that allowed a person to be trusted by an animal trained to the highest tier of distrust. The passage read as if it was describing someone specific. Osei suspected it was. Nadia's response to the call is not immediate enthusiasm. It is the careful, honest response of someone who has been asked to do something that matters and knows enough to understand the weight of it. She asks questions, practical, specific, the questions of a person whose professional instinct is to understand a situation before entering it. She asks about the dog's individual behavioral profiles. She asks what has been tried. She asks what success would look like and who would determine it. Osei answers each question fully, which is itself a kind of audition. She is assessing whether Nadia's questions are the right questions, and they are. What Nadia does not ask, but what the audience is waiting for her to ask, is why her specifically. She doesn't ask because she already suspects the answer has something to do with Joe, and she is not yet ready to receive that answer in full. She says she needs to think. She says she'll call back by Friday. After the call ends, she sits in her apartment for a while, Ptolemy in her lap, and she looks at the drawer of her bedside table where the unsent letter lives. The chapter ends without resolution. She does not open the drawer, does not make a decision, does not call anyone for advice. She simply sits with the weight of being asked to do something that might matter in a way that her current life has not yet required of her. The audience sits with her. The question of whether she will say yes feels, already, like it costs something to hold. She calls back on Thursday, not Friday, because she is not a person who makes decisions slowly once she has made them. She says yes with the qualifier that she cannot promise any particular outcome, and Osi says that no particular outcome is being promised in return, only the chance to try something that hasn't been tried. Arrangements are made. Nadia takes a week of leave from the animal hospital, where her supervisor, a pragmatic, generous woman named Dr. Fenn, tells her that what she is going to do sounds both unusual and exactly right, which is how Dr. Fenn categorizes most things she approves of. Nadia packs a bag with the careful practicality of someone who does not know how long she will be gone, but does not want to overpack, which tells the audience something about her. She drives the 2 hours to the facility on a Monday morning in mid-autumn, the highway running through flat country that gradually gives way to the particular landscape of military geography. Wide, purposeful, stripped of ornamentation. She arrives at the gate at 9:15. She gives her name. The gate opens. The audience has been waiting for this moment since Chapter 1, and the narration honors the wait by describing Nadia's arrival slowly. The gravel of the parking lot, the smell of the compound, the sound of dogs somewhere beyond the main building, alert and present, the way military dogs always sound. Ray is assigned to be her guide and liaison for the duration of her visit, which Osi decided for reasons she did not entirely explain, but that Ray suspects involve his having known Joe best. He meets Nadia at the entrance with the slightly guarded warmth of a man who wants to be hopeful about this, and has been hopeful about things before that didn't work out. He walks her through the facility, the training fields, the assessment areas, the kennel blocks for the active handler teams, describing the operation in terms that are informative without being condescending. Nadia listens and asks the same kind of careful questions she asked Osi on the phone, and Ray notices this with the specific appreciation of someone who has spent years around people who talk more than they listen. He does not take her to the 7 dogs on the first day. This is not his withholding. It is Osi's protocol, which Osi designed deliberately. She wants Nadia to understand the facility, the culture, the standard operating world of the place, before she encounters the exception to it. She wants Nadia to have a full picture of what these dogs were trained to be before she sees what they have become in the absence of Joe. By the end of the first day, Nadia has walked every operational area of the compound, eaten lunch in the staff cafeteria, been introduced to 12 people whose names she writes carefully in a small notebook, and begun to understand the world she has entered. The chapter ends with her standing outside the kennel block that houses the 7 dogs in the early evening, listening to the sounds of them without going in. She does not go in. Not yet. The audience can feel the restraint of this and the rightness of it. She goes in on the second morning, just after 6, before the full facility has come alive. Ray is with her but stands back at the kennel block entrance. His being there for safety, his staying back an instinct he doesn't fully explain. The kennel housing the 7 dogs is clean, well lit. The dogs visible through their individual wire enclosures. They are awake. Military dogs tend to be early risers, and they are alert in the way they are always alert, which is totally without apparent rest. Nadia enters slowly, the way she enters every space where animals are, without rush, without announcement, with the particular quality of presence that she has always had, and that Joe Callaway once described at Thanksgiving as not making yourself a surprise. She does not speak first. She moves to the center of the kennel aisle and stands still. The dogs watch her. Atlas, at the far end of the row, lifts his head. Cora, in the enclosure nearest to Nadia, turns her full attention on her in the way Cora turns her attention on everything, completely and without expression. Ghost, at the middle of the row, steps once toward the front of his enclosure and stops. Nothing dramatic happens. And yet something is happening, and the audience can feel it in the quality of the narration, in the temperature of the room, in the specific attention of each dog, in the way the routine noise of the kennel has gone slightly quieter, as if the animals are doing what animals do when something requires their full focus. Nadia speaks after approximately 3 minutes of standing still. She does not use commands. She does not use the language of handling. She speaks in a low, conversational register, not to the dogs collectively, but moving her attention from one to the next as if she is introducing herself to individuals at a gathering. She says their names. She has memorized all 7 from Ray's briefings. She uses each name once, quietly, the way you say someone's name when you want them to know you know it. The dog's responses are individually distinct. Atlas, who has not left the back wall of his enclosure for any new handler, walks forward to the front gate and sits. Cora shifts her weight in a way that is, Ray observes from the doorway, the closest she has come to relaxation in months. Wick, the oldest, makes a sound, not a bark, something lower. A sound Ray has heard dogs make when they are deciding about something. Nadia notices all of this and says nothing about it. She does not react with triumph or excitement, which the audience understands is partly why it is working. She is not there to win. She is there to be present. After 15 minutes, she steps back from the central aisle, thanks the dogs, actually thanks them, in the same conversational tone, and walks back to where Ray is standing. He is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "That's more than anyone's gotten in 4 months." Nadia nods. She looks back at the kennels where the 7 dogs are still watching the door through which she just left. And then she says something that the chapter ends on, that the audience will carry into the next chapter with the full weight of needing to understand it. "I told them I knew Joe." Ray stares at her. The chapter ends. Ray asks her to tell him exactly what she said. They are seated in the staff break room with 2 cups of coffee that Ray made on autopilot, and Nadia walks him through it with the honesty of someone who does not see any reason to be less than accurate. She tells him that she introduced herself to each dog by name. She tells him that she explained, in simple, direct language, that she was not there to replace their handler, that no one could do that, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She tells him that she told them she had known Joe Callaway, that he had spoken to her about animals in a way that she had never forgotten, that she thought he was one of the most genuinely good people she had encountered. And then, at the end, almost as an afterthought, because it felt true rather than strategic, she said Joe's name, not as a command, not as a cue, not as a technique. She simply said, "Joe Callaway loved you. I want you to know that he did." Ray is quiet for a long time after she finishes. Then he says that in 16 years of working with military dogs, he has never heard anyone say that to an animal and mean it the way she clearly meant it. He does not say it as a compliment exactly. He says it as the observation of a man who is rearranging something in his understanding. Nadia tells him she is not certain it will hold, that one visit is not a rehabilitation, that she is a veterinary technician and no handler or a behaviorist, and she is aware of the limits of what she can offer. Ray tells her that she is currently the most effective intervention this facility has had in 4 months, and that her limits are less important right now than her results. The narration steps back from the break room and opens into something wider, a reflection on what the dogs are responding to, constructed carefully to be emotionally true rather than scientifically overclaiming. Dogs trained to the level of these 7 are not simply obeying a voice or a scent. They are responding to the complex, integrated signal of a person, the way they move, the speed of their breathing, the quality of their attention, the emotional information embedded in every element of how a human being presents themselves in a given moment. What Nadia brought into that kennel was not a performance of safety. It was actual safety, the real thing, the unmistakable thing, the thing that cannot be manufactured. And she brought something else. She brought a connection, however indirect, to the person these animals were waiting for. She cannot be Joe, but she is someone who knew Joe and was changed by knowing him. And animals trained to the level of these 7 are not confused about the difference between a person presenting a false connection and a person presenting a real one. The audience is given this not as a tidy explanation, but something to sit with. The idea that love, absorbed by a person who received it and carried honestly, becomes something detectable. Something that 7 animals trained to extraordinary attentiveness can recognize as real. The chapter ends with Nadia driving back to her lodging for the evening past the facility's outer perimeter, and through the fence she can see the kennel block, lights still on in the windows, and she thinks about Joe's ways. You don't build it, you earn it, and understands. for the first time, that he was describing something he had already seen in her without telling her. The days that follow take on a rhythm. Nadia arrives at the kennel early each morning and spends the first hour simply being present. No commands, no exercises, no formal training protocol. She reads, she writes in her small notebook. She talks to the dogs in the same conversational way she spoke to them on the first day, moving through topics without agenda. What she observed on the drive in. Something she read the previous evening, a memory of a conversation with Joe that surfaces and is worth sharing. The dogs attend to her in ways that develop incrementally. Atlas begins to accept basic touch through the kennel gate by the third day. A significant development, Ray tells her, for a dog who has not permitted physical contact from any non-facility staff person in months. Cora, who is the most evaluating of the group, begins to track Nadia's movements in the kennel with a quality of attention that is different from her surveillance attention, warmer, less tactical. Juno, the fastest and most energetic, begins to press against the kennel gate when Nadia passes, asking to be closer. Each small development is noted in Nadia's notebook and reported to Ray and Osi not as victories but as data points. She is careful not to overinterpret, not to celebrate too early, not to mistake the beginning of trust for its establishment. Progress is not linear. On the fifth day, Bruno, the large, deliberate dog who has been the most neutral of the seven, has a session that goes backward. He does not respond to his name. He moves to the rear of his enclosure and stays there for the duration of Nadia's visit. She does not push. She moves past his kennel without additional attention, returns at the end of the session to say a brief, calm goodbye, and reports the regression to Ray without drama. Ray, who has been watching all of this with a kind of suspended hope he does not entirely trust, asks her how she doesn't take it personally. She thinks about this for a moment and says, "Because it's not about me, he's having a bad day. So am I, sometimes." The simplicity of this answer does something to Ray, loosens something in him that has been tight for months. Since before Joe died, the kind of tightness that comes from working in a field where you are expected to have answers, and sometimes don't. He tells her about Joe that evening, a long, unhurried account of the 16 years they worked alongside each other, the stories that accumulate between two people who share a vocation. Nadia listens with the full attention she gives everything. She adds things. Her 2 evenings with Joe at family gatherings, the Thanksgiving conversation, the articles he sent her. Together they build a fuller portrait of a person than either of them has alone. And the chapter ends on the two of them in the break room past closing time, laughing at something Joe apparently did once at a facility review that was simultaneously entirely professional and somehow deeply characteristic of exactly who he was. The audience has been given something they didn't know they needed. 2 people grieving together. By the 8th day, 6 of the 7 dogs have progressed to the point where Osi has cautiously begun discussing next steps. Not new permanent handlers, not yet, but the resumption of basic training contact. Ghost remains the exception. He has been present for every one of Nadia's visits. He has watched everything. He has not come forward. Nadia has not forced the question. She visits his kennel for the same time she visits each of the others, giving him the same conversational presence, the same use of his name, the same honesty about who she is and why she is there. She has not treated him as a special case or a final obstacle. She has treated him as a dog who is taking the time he needs, which is the only thing she knows how to do. On the morning of the 9th day, she arrives to find Ray waiting outside the kennel block with an expression she cannot immediately read. He tells her that Ghost was active in the night, moving around his enclosure, which he rarely does, vocalizing quietly at intervals. He tells her this without interpretation, because he does not want to give her an expectation that might shape the morning in the wrong direction. Nadia nods and goes in. The morning proceeds as mornings have proceeded. She works her way through the kennels in her usual order, saving Ghost for last as she always does. Not because she has given up on him, but because she has learned that he observes everything that happens with the other dogs before deciding what to do with what he has seen. When she reaches Ghost's kennel, he is at the front of his enclosure. Not pressed against the gate, simply there, at the front, in the place where forward attention is expressed by dogs who are considering something. She sits cross-legged on the kennel aisle floor so that she is at his eye level. She has done this before without result. This morning she does it and says nothing for a long time. Then, very quietly, she says Joe's name, not as a technique, not as a strategy, simply because it is what she is thinking, and she has been honest with these dogs from the beginning, and honesty is the only thing she has that actually works. Ghost moves forward. He presses his nose to the kennel gate, to the space nearest Nadia's hand. She does not reach for him. She waits. He presses forward again, and she lifts her hand slowly and lets him find it. And Ghost, the dog who has not accepted voluntary contact with anyone outside the facility staff in 9 months, holds his head against her palm for a long moment and is still. Ray, watching from the doorway, makes the sound of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and is no longer holding it. Nadia does not move. She keeps her hand exactly where it is, her eyes on Ghost, and she says quietly, not to Ray, not to anyone in particular, just into the air of the kennel where 7 dogs are now present and listening. He knew you, didn't he? It is not a question. Nadia's final day at the facility arrives on a Friday, 2 weeks after she drove through the gate for the first time. She spends the morning in the kennel as she has every morning. But today the visit is different, not in structure, but in weight. The dogs know, in the way animals know, that something is changing. Atlas is watchful. Cora presses closer to the gate than usual. Juno is restless. Ghost, who has been within voluntary contact distance of Nadia every day since the morning he came forward, sits at the front of his enclosure and watches her with the particular expression of an animal who has made a decision about a person and is now being asked to hold it in their absence. Nadia goes through the visit with the same steady care as always. Each dog by name, the same honest presence, the same quiet conversation. She tells them, in the straightforward way she has told them everything, that she is going back to her regular life, but that she is not disappearing, that Ray will be in contact and she will be reachable, and that what they have begun together is not ending. She does not know how much of this they understand in language. She knows, from 9 years of working with animals, that the feeling she is carrying, the specific combination of care and resolve, is precisely the kind of information they are built to receive. She saves Ghost for last, as always. She puts her hand against the kennel gate, and he presses his forehead into her palm, and she says Joe's name one more time, because it is still true and will continue to be true, and Ghost closes his eyes briefly in the way of animals who are absorbing rather than simply receiving. Ozzy meets Nadia at the facility entrance before she drives out. She thanks her with the particular economy of a person who does not use words beyond what they mean. She tells Nadia that the facility will be in contact about next steps for the dogs, that the process of careful, phased handler reintroduction will begin in the coming weeks, that the behavioral framework Nadia has helped establish will be the foundation for that work. She tells Nadia, in a tone that is different from her operational voice, quieter, more personal, that she read the folder Joe kept, that she understands why Nadia's name was in it. Ray walks Nadia to her car. He is carrying something, a small envelope that he hands to her at her driver's side door. He tells her it is from Joe's daughter, who heard about what happened at the facility and asked Ray to deliver it. Inside the envelope is a note handwritten that Nadia reads before she starts the car. Joe's daughter writes that she found her father's behavioral assessment from 2 years ago, the one where he described the qualities he looked for in people who could be trusted by military animals, and that reading it, she understood he was writing about someone specific. She writes that she is glad her father knew people worth knowing. Nadia sits in the parking lot for a while after reading this. Then she takes the unsent letter from her bag. She brought it from the bedside drawer, knowing somehow that it needed to travel with her, and she addresses it properly and puts a stamp on it and leaves it in the facility's outgoing mail. She drives out through the gate into a mid-autumn afternoon, the facility receding in her mirrors, and the audience travels with her into the specific quality of peace that belongs to a person who has done something that mattered and knows it. Not triumphantly, but with the quiet, durable satisfaction of work that was real, A connection that was honest, and a name that was spoken aloud by someone who meant it, in a room where 7 dogs were finally, at last, ready to hear it.